I'm here to tell you about our use of Coverity for the insurance of software quality for life-saving medical devices. Me, myself, I'm working for the medical part of Dräger. I'm not sure if anybody of you has ever heard of Dräger. Let me first introduce that company before I tell you a little bit about anesthesia. That's a picture of an operating room where the software that I am developing is used. And then later I will tell you a little bit about the standards that we must meet if we want to produce software to be used in such an operating room. And finally, I will show you one of the defects that is still in or was in our software. Of course, also our software is not error-free, but we try our best to deliver good software. Well, is there anybody here who knows or who knew Dräger before he read the company name on the slides? Hopefully not, I must say, because Dräger creates technology for life. If you have seen a Dräger logo somewhere, your life might have been in danger, in fact. And so I hope you have not seen the logo before. Policemen, firefighters, coal miners, they know Dräger quite good. Dräger produces, for example, helmets and filters and breathing machines, breathing apparatus to support them. That's the safety division of Dräger who creates such devices. There's only very little software part in those devices typically. I've never seen a firefighter helmet with software inside, but maybe that comes in a few years. I am working for the medical division of Dräger, where we make products for the operating room, as you have seen on the very first slide, but also for intensive care units. We produce ventilators, and we produce anesthesia machines, all kind of machines that you will hopefully never need to use and will most likely never see. Let me introduce you a little bit to anesthesia, which is the field that I am creating software for. It's a quite young part of medicine, as you might be surprised to hear. The first experiments, one must say, made in anesthesia are just a bit more than 100 years ago. In the late 1850s, the first medical doctors used ether and chloroform to do anesthesia at all. Before that, there was maybe whiskey or things like that to relieve you a little bit or your pain when you needed medical treatment. 100 years later, the first modern anesthetic gas has been developed, halotan, and then from that time on, roughly every 10 or 20 years, a new medical detergent has been developed and is currently used. Today, you use most times of the time you use one of two anesthetic gases for anesthesia. So it's a very it's not that there are new products every year and new developments every year, but it's a very conservative market that we are producing machines for. If you should you ever need to be in an operating room, you will most likely not want to watch the operator do his treatment to your knee, to your shoulder, whatever. You will always want to be hypnotized, or the doctor must make sure that you really lose your consciousness. And he will also try to relieve your pain that you would otherwise feel. Anesthesia is always a combination of three interacting parts: hypnosia and analgesia, as you've seen, you can see in that triangle. But they are interacting those parts of anesthesia, and always when you apply a drug, for example, to relieve your pain, you will always also get a little bit of relaxation and hypnosia. And what happens then is that you can't breathe anymore. when your body is relaxed, you will not be able to survive without help. And that's where our machines come into the field. Our machines are used to save your life during an operation in the operation room. You can see that it really is vital that those machines work correctly. During your operation, the machine should really not fail. So the bugs that we can think of in our software will not only lead to customer dissatisfaction or things like that, what we've seen in the last slides. Bugs in our software can really kill people, or could really kill people. This is what an anesthesia device looked just a few decades ago. What you need if you want to do anesthesia in an operating theater is a gas supply where you apply a mixture of pressurized air, typically also oxygen, sometimes laughing gas or nitrogen dioxide. You also typically add some anesthetic agent gas that makes you sleep. It looks like you sleep, but in fact you're more dead than that you are sleeping. And as I mentioned, if you are in that situation, you can't, for example, breathe anymore, or you would not do that. So you also will have to add some mechanism to support or to replace the ventilation that is not happening anymore. And what you can also see here in one of those very first anesthesia devices, which were built by Dräger, is a carbon dioxide filter. That's basically what you need for an anesthesia device. Nothing more. 0 lines of code. But today, this is a slide from a market presentation. Customers have very special needs, as printed here very big. Today, an operating theater is more like a factory than it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago. You have parallel processes established in hospitals. Everything needs to be fast. Complex logistics have to be coped with. All the people that are involved typically today are stressed. They don't want to bother with the software that is inside the machine. They don't want even to know that there is software in there. They want a machine which is similar to the one I've shown before, with no software in there. All those requirements that we are currently getting from our customers lead to much more complex systems than the one that you've seen before. A modern anesthetic workplace looks more like this. Here you can see that there are a number of computers connected to a complex device which still delivers fresh gas, volatile agents, ventilation support is still included in there, of course, and the same carbon dioxide filter which we've seen before. That's all in here. But today, there's also monitoring. As you see on one of the screens, there are curves that you might have seen in Gray's Anatomy or emergency room. There's gas monitoring for gas concentrations and for the amounts of gas that's getting in and out of the lung of the patient. There's more patient monitoring like electrocardiograms, blood pressures, pulse oximetry, all the stuff that you might have heard of when you're a fan of emergency room or Gray's Anatomy. Today, typically such a workplace is also connected to a clinical information system where you can, as an operator, where you can have a look at previous treatments and the X-ray pictures taken on MRI machines somewhere completely in a completely different place in the hospital, things like that. What you can also see here is a very new product on one of the of the screens, Smart Pilot. Smart applications are coming more and more into place in the operating rooms. This one is an application that tries to predict the agent concentration in the treatment or during the treatment, which is then to deliver as little gas as possible to the patient while still achieving a very good level of anesthesia. All this is done to optimize processes in hospitals. And as you might not wonder about, there is literally hundreds of thousands of lines of code in these applications, not including operating systems, libraries, stuff like that. So there is a need, a definite need, to find bugs before they can ever get into the field. And in order to make sure that software of medical devices is of a very high level of quality, there are a number of international standards that you have to cope with if you want to place your product in the market. The most important one for me as a software developer is the ISO IEC 62304. Every software developer working for a software company doing medical devices, creating medical devices, will know this norm. I will just, on the next few slides, show you very few aspects of that. What I wanted to show here is that we are not only doing this for fun. We are not just scanning our code for defects because we want to satisfy our customers. We are urged to do so also by a lot of regulations, international standards that we need to comply with. If you make software for medical devices, you're urged to classify your software, for example. The standard that I mentioned before says that there are 3 levels of quality or 3 levels of software that you can put into your system. Class R software must not imply any chance for injury or damage of health to a patient. It means I can't imagine any piece of software which is connected to a medical device that could fulfill this class. Typically, at least a non-serious injury is possible, even if you just think of a clinical information system that just stores patient data in a database. If you mix up patient data and present to a doctor the wrong data, that might lead to wrong decision, and that can definitely lead to serious injury, or at least non-serious injury. The software that we put into anesthesia systems typically is of class C. A defect in that piece of software can lead to death or serious injury. So there must not be defects that could arise in a failure. We have to evaluate all possible defects that we can think of and take countermeasures to make sure that a software error does not lead to a harmful error situation in an operating room. In order to have developers create good quality software for such a system that could cause such severe harm to a patient, the standard that I mentioned asks you to take additional or to define additional software acceptance criteria, as they call it, for each and every software unit that goes into such a system. Currently, typically previously we did code reviews and unit testing for most of those, and we still do so. We won't change that. We will still implement unit tests, and we still do manual code reviews for each line of code that gets into our systems. But a lot of those acceptance criteria that are mentioned in the standards can be checked by different types of checkers of Coverity. And I will now give a few examples where Coverity can directly help us to make sure that our software fulfills these requirements of the software norm. For example, when this is more or less trivial, initialization of variables is absolutely essential. An uninitialized variable can, of course, cause all kinds of errors. Unpredictable behavior, which is unacceptable for such an anesthesia device. But you can be sure that there's also, although we have code reviews at Dräger and a very good level of quality already, there are uninitialized variables, because when you manually test your software, you can't find all of them. But it's trivial for Coverity to make sure that all your variables are initialized. Checkers that find such defects are called uninitialized or uninitialized constructor, and their false positive rate is so low, they really help us find a lot of those bugs. We can tick this acceptance criteria, can say, yes, we have unit tests, we have our manual code readings, but Coverity does the best job here in this part. Another rule where we have to define additional software acceptance criteria is data and control flow. Unreachable code, dead code, all that kind of code defects are in every piece of software. And it's almost impossible to find those defects by manual code reviews. You will always, you will very likely at least oversee missing breaks and things that are very easy to produce when you write C or C++ code. That language is not the very best language designed to avoid such types of defects, but we still use it. And Coverity does a very good job in showing us where we should have a closer look to detect defects. The next one is memory management. There's checkers like resource leaks, buffer size checkers, overrun static and dynamic checkers. They find a lot of defects that are very difficult to track if you manually look at your code. In particular, are such defects typically dynamically appearing errors, which are, if you strictly do a static analysis, not easy to detect. But Coverity tries also to find dynamically occurring errors by analyzing the code paths that might occur during runtime. And in our code base, I can say there's a lot of effects that are shown. They are not bugs, really not bugs, but defects that Coverity found that have not been seen by very experienced programmers and reviewers before. Finally, Coverity can also help us find resource allocation problems. There are checkers like resource leakers, constructor, destructor leaks, and things like that. Of course, in this aspect, Coverity cannot find all kind of defects, because a lot of defects here, more than mentioned before for the other checkers, a lot of those defects that are meant here are occurring at runtime in a dynamic changing system. I think most of the defects will be easier or will more likely be found during system testing at the very end of the development phase. But not using Coverity to find at least some of them before is nonsense. If you have Coverity available, you should do so. A few other smaller ticks can be made at proper event sequences and fault handling, where specific Coverity checkers can also help, at least a little bit. For example, the checker, where have I wrote that, evaluation orders, when that is not probably meant by the terminology of the standard here, but the C++ language is so complex that you can write down statements where the behavior is unpredictable. It depends on the compiler configuration, on the target system that you are deploying your software for. And it is very good that that Coverity points out where such such problems might arise, for example, when you later decide to change your compiler configuration or your target system. Even if the defect does not create any bug in the current configuration, finding such defects in advance before they happen is a very good feature of Coverity here. Also fault handling, I marked with a smaller tick here. The only checker that I found when I quickly looked at the list of checkers here in this category is uncaught exceptions. But an exception thrown by our piece of software resulting in a reset of our system is an absolute inappropriate behavior if you think of an anesthesia machine, of course. Still, we have defects, as I mentioned before, in our software. This is one example of a piece of software which went into our anesthesia machines. Is anybody here who can spot the error in this piece of code? There's one hand up in the back. It is quite obvious, and Lind found it. We've been using Lind for years before. And Lind found the error and wrote two warnings here. The writer of this code, the author, ignored the return value of the memset function, one warning, and it claimed that mbuffer is not initialized by the constructor. During the manual code review, the very experienced software developer who wrote this piece of code, who was reading the code with other developers, they looked at it and said, oh, another 2 false positives from Lind. We don't want to take account of the return code of memset. We never do so. So we just switch off that error. And the other one must be another false positive. Obviously, mbuffer is initialized to 0 here for the full buffer size. So they also excluded that Lind error. But in fact, it is an error. And Coverity mentioned, or Coverity showed us what is in fact the wrong statement here. It is memset, and calling memset with these arguments does nothing if implemented correctly, at least. What this statement means is write 0 times the number 1024 to mbuffer. The last 2 arguments are swapped. The errors which have been shown by Lind show exactly the same. mbuffer is not initialized by the constructor. That was correct. But the false positive rate of Lind is so high that it's written quickly here that this is a false error, false positive of Lind. The correct statement or the correct defect from Coverity shows exactly what is happening here, and it is quite good understandable what is wrong here. And the error shown up in Coverity finally led us to, or made it possible for us to correct this error. And now this is a historical version of the file. Of course, this bug is fixed and not in the field today.